Get your black hands off that car before I call the cops.
I'm just trying to help. I can hear what's wrong with it.
Help? You? A bum off the street is gonna fix what 12 mechanics couldn't get out?
The engine's misfiring. Everyone here missed it.
And what are you gonna do about it? Fix it with those filthy black fingers of yours?
Yes, sir. That's exactly what I'm gonna do.
Everybody stop. The street monkey wants to play mechanic. Let's see him perform before security drags him out.
A cherry red 1962 Ferrari 250 GT. $3 million of Italian steel. 12 of the country's best mechanics had given up on it, and the only man who knew what was wrong was standing in torn boots with no tools. But just minutes later, Gregory Thornton would regret every single word, because what he lost that day wasn't just his dignity. It was his entire career. Detroit in November hits different. The kind of cold that doesn't just chill your skin, it gets into your joints, your lungs, your thinking. The sky stays gray for weeks. The wind comes off the river like it has something personal against you. Under the Jefferson Avenue overpass, Andre Vaughn slept on a flattened cardboard box with a wool blanket he'd found behind a Salvation Army drop-off. He kept his belongings in a single black duffel bag, a change of clothes, a half-empty bottle of water, and one thing that didn't belong to a man in his situation. A worn-out copy of a Colombo 512 engine manual, pages soft from being read 1,000 times. Andre was 41 years old, 6'2", broad shoulders, built from years of lifting engine blocks, not from any gym. His hands were rough, scarred across the knuckles, with grease permanently embedded in the lines of his palms. The kind of hands that told a story most people didn't bother to read. He hadn't always been here. 3 years ago, Andre Vaughn held the title of Senior Mechanical Engineer at Caldwell Industries, one of the most respected technology and automotive R&D firms in the Midwest. He had designed modifications for prototype engines. He had solved alignment problems that stumped entire teams. His performance reviews were spotless. His colleagues respected him. But his direct supervisor didn't. Gregory Thornton had been the director of technical operations at Caldwell Industries for 9 years. Ivy League degree, country club membership, a corner office with a view of the Detroit skyline. On paper, Thornton was the model executive, polished, articulate, connected. Behind closed doors, he was something else entirely. Thornton had a pattern. Every person of color who rose above a certain level in his department eventually found themselves buried in impossible deadlines, denied resources, written up for minor infractions that white engineers committed daily without consequence. It was never loud, never obvious, just a slow, systematic squeeze until the person either quit or gave him enough paper to justify termination. Andre lasted longer than most. 2 years under Thornton's management. 2 years of watching his project proposals get reassigned to junior white engineers who barely understood the specifications Andre had drafted. 2 years of being left off meeting invitations, then getting reprimanded for not being in the loop. 2 years of hearing Thornton joke to other directors that Andre was the diversity hire who somehow stuck around. The small things added up. Andre's access to the advanced simulation lab was revoked without explanation. His parking spot was reassigned to a new hire. His name was misspelled on 3 consecutive department reports. Always a different misspelling. Always just careless enough to look accidental. When Andre corrected it in an email, Thornton replied all, "Sorry, there are a lot of names to keep track of. Some are harder than others." Everyone on the thread understood what that meant. Nobody said a word. Then came the incident. A critical prototype engine, the Kessler V8, a flagship project worth $500,000 in development costs, failed during a live client demonstration. The engine seized during a high RPM stress test. Smoke filled the testing bay. The client's team stepped back from the glass. 3 months of work destroyed in 45 seconds. Thornton had rushed the timeline by 2 weeks. He had ignored Andre's written safety warnings about insufficient break-in cycles. He had personally overridden Andre's calibration settings the morning of the demonstration, logging into the system with his supervisor code and changing 3 critical parameters without telling anyone. When the engine blew, Thornton needed someone to blame. He worked fast. That same evening, he accessed the project management system and edited the post-incident report 6 times. Each revision removed another reference to his own involvement. He swapped the authorization logs. He deleted the email chain where Andre had flagged the safety concerns. He put Andre's name on every decision that Thornton himself had made. By the time the report reached HR the next morning, it read like an open and shut case. Andre Vaughn. Negligent calibration, unauthorized parameter changes, failure to follow safety protocol. 3 violations. Automatic termination. Andre was called into the HR office at 8:15. The meeting lasted 11 minutes. He wasn't shown the full report. He wasn't given the authorization logs. He was told the decision was final and that security would escort him to collect his personal belongings. He tried to speak. He tried to explain that the calibration settings in the system weren't his, that someone had changed them after his final sign-off, that he had emails proving he'd warned about the rushed timeline. The HR manager, a woman who had never visited the R&D floor in her entire tenure, looked at him over her glasses and said, "The report is very clear, Mr. Vaughn. I'm sorry." Security walked him out at 8:31, past his desk, past his colleagues, past the whiteboard where his handwriting still outlined the Kessler V8's fuel injection sequence. Nobody made eye contact. Nobody said goodbye. One engineer, a young woman named Sarah who had worked under Andre for 6 months, opened her mouth like she was about to speak. Then she saw Thornton watching from the hallway. She closed it. Andre walked out of Caldwell Industries carrying a cardboard box with a coffee mug, a framed photo of his grandfather, and the Colombo V12 manual that Elton Vaughn had given him on his first day of college. Thornton watched from his office window, coffee in hand. Within 6 months, Andre lost his apartment. The lease required proof of employment. Then his car, repossessed after 2 missed payments. Then his credit. Then his phone. Then every connection to the life he'd built over 15 years of honest work. The engineering community in Detroit is small. Word travels through shop floors and LinkedIn threads faster than any press release. Thornton didn't need to make phone calls. The termination report did the work for him. Andre Vaughn, fired for negligence on a $500,000 prototype. That sentence followed him like a shadow. No firm would touch him. No recruiter would return his calls. His resume went from a weapon to a liability overnight. So Andre ended up under a bridge. Not because he lacked talent, not because he lacked work ethic, but because one man with power decided that a black engineer didn't deserve a seat at the table. That was 3 years ago. Now, on this particular Thursday morning, Andre was walking along Michigan Avenue toward a soup kitchen on Trumbull Street, the same route he walked every day, past the same warehouses, past the same loading docks, past the main gate of Caldwell Industries. He usually kept his head down when he passed. Too many memories. Too much anger that he'd learned to pack into a small, quiet place inside his chest. But today something was different. The main service bay doors were wide open. A flatbed truck was backing a car into the R&D wing, and not just any car. A 1962 Ferrari 250 GT Series 2 Cabriolet. Cherry red, chrome, wire wheels. The kind of car that collectors would kill for. Andre stopped dead on the sidewalk. He knew that car. Every mechanic who'd ever touched Italian steel knew that car. It was the crown jewel of Preston Caldwell's personal collection. A vehicle worth north of $3 million, and one of fewer than 40 ever built. Word on the street, even streets where homeless men walked, was that the Ferrari had developed a mysterious engine failure. a deep, irregular ticking that no one could diagnose. Preston Caldwell, the billionaire founder of Caldwell Industries, had reportedly flown in specialists from New York, Los Angeles, even a team from Maranello, Italy. 12 mechanics total, the best in the business. None of them could fix it. Andre stood at the fence and listened. Even from 60 feet away, through the noise of the loading dock, he could hear it. The engine was running on the flatbed for the transfer, and there it was. A faint, arrhythmic knock buried beneath the normal, idle pattern. His ears locked onto it the way a musician locks onto a wrong note in a symphony. He knew what it was. He was almost certain, and everything inside him said to keep walking. Don't go in there. Don't set foot in that building. You're nobody now. But his feet didn't listen. Andre walked through the open bay door. No badge, no appointment, no invitation. Just a man in a torn coat, following a sound that only he seemed to understand. The R&D bay was enormous. Polished concrete floors, LED strip lighting, hydraulic lifts, diagnostic stations, and tool walls that stretched floor to ceiling. 20 or 30 people moved through the space, mechanics in blue jumpsuits, engineers in white coats, technicians with tablets. The Ferrari was being rolled onto the center lift, and a small crowd had already gathered. Andre moved to the edge of the group, quiet, unnoticed. He leaned slightly forward, tilting his head, listening to the engine the way a doctor listens to a heartbeat through a stethoscope. That's when Gregory Thornton walked in. Thornton hadn't changed. Same pressed slacks, same silver watch, same walk, the kind that said every square foot of this building belonged to him. He was barking orders about the Ferrari, telling the lead mechanics to run a full electronic diagnostic first, compression test second, visual teardown third. Then he saw Andre. For a moment, Thornton just stared, like he was looking at a ghost. Then his face twisted into something between disgust and amusement. "Well, well, look what the wind blew in." Andre said nothing. His eyes stayed on the Ferrari. "I know you," Thornton said, stepping closer. His voice rose, not for Andre's benefit, but for everyone within earshot. "You used to work here. Vaughn, right? The one who blew up the Kessler prototype and cost us $500,000. Andre's jaw tightened. That was a lie. Thornton knew it was a lie. But lies told loudly become truth in rooms where no one pushes back. "Sir, I didn't blow up anything. You know what really—" "What I know," Thornton cut him off, "is that you're trespassing on private property. What I know is that you're standing in my R&D bay looking like you haven't showered in a month." He turned to the room, arms wide. "Does anyone know how a homeless man got past security?" Nervous laughter. A few people looked away. Nobody said a word. That's when Andre took a step forward and spoke the words that would set everything in motion. "That Ferrari. Your guys are looking in the wrong place. The misfire isn't electrical, it's mechanical, and I can fix it." The room went dead silent. Thornton stared at him for 3 full seconds. Then he laughed. Not a small laugh. A loud, performative laugh designed to make Andre as small as possible in front of as many people as possible. And that laugh echoed through every corner of the bay, right into the second-floor observation office where Preston Caldwell himself stood watching through the glass with a cup of coffee and a very different expression on his face. If you think you know where this story is going, I promise you, you don't. Because what Andre Vaughn carried inside him was worth more than every tool in that building combined. Andre Vaughn didn't learn engines in a classroom. He learned them in a garage with no door, in the backyard of a rented house in Flint, Michigan. His grandfather, Elton Vaughn, had worked the General Motors assembly line for 31 years. Body shop, paint, and final trim. 6 days a week. Never missed a shift. Never got promoted past the floor. But what Elton knew about engines could fill a library. Every Saturday morning, from the time Andre was 7 years old, his grandfather would drag something into that garage. A lawnmower engine, a junked motorcycle, a water pump pulled from a neighbor's basement. Whatever he could find. And he'd set it on the workbench and say the same thing every single time. Listen first, touch second, think the whole time. That was the rule. Before Andre could pick up a wrench, he had to close his eyes and listen to the machine run. Or try to run. His grandfather would quiz him. What's that clicking? Where's it coming from? Top or bottom? Is it consistent or random? Fast or slow? By the time Andre was 10, he could identify a failing valve spring by sound alone. By 12, he was rebuilding carburetors on the kitchen table while his mother shook her head and his grandfather beamed like he'd struck gold. Elton never called it a gift. He called it a discipline. Anybody can learn to swing a hammer, he told Andre once. Not everybody can learn to hear what the metal is telling you. That's the difference between a mechanic and an engineer. Andre carried that sentence like a passport. Through high school, through a full scholarship to Wayne State University's mechanical engineering program, the first in his family to attend college. Through his first internship at a small machine shop in Dearborn. Through 7 years of working his way up the ladder at 3 different firms before landing at Caldwell Industries. He was good. Not just good. He was the person other engineers came to when they were stuck. His specialty was diagnosis, finding the invisible fault, the misalignment that didn't show up on a scan, the microfracture that only revealed itself under load, the timing error buried so deep inside a system that computers passed right over it. His method was always the same. Close his eyes, listen, let the machine speak. His colleagues called it Andre's ear. Some of them joked about it. A few were jealous. But when a prototype worth 6 figures was misbehaving on a Friday afternoon and the whole team was staring at screens full of green check marks, it was Andre they called. And he always delivered. That reputation is what made Thornton nervous. Thornton didn't build things. He managed budgets, timelines, and people, and he managed them through control. A black engineer who could solve problems that Thornton's hand-picked team couldn't was a threat. Not a professional threat, something deeper. Something Thornton would never admit out loud, but acted on every single day. So he buried Andre. Slowly, methodically, until the day he erased him completely. But there's something Thornton didn't understand, something people like him never understand. You can take a man's job. You can take his apartment, his car, his phone, his reputation. You can put him under a bridge in November and let the cold eat at him for 3 years. But you cannot take what's in his hands. Andre never stopped practicing. Under that overpass, with no tools and no workshop, he kept his skills alive the only way he could. He collected broken machines that people threw away. Alarm clocks, small motors, portable fans, anything with moving parts. He would take them apart on the concrete, lay every piece in order, study them, and put them back together. Sometimes they worked again. Sometimes they didn't. That wasn't the point. The point was the discipline. Listen first, touch second, think the whole time. 3 years of homelessness hadn't dulled his hands. They'd sharpened them. Without tools, he had learned to feel what most mechanics needed instruments to detect. A warped bearing, a hairline crack in a housing, a gear tooth worn down by 0.5 millimeter. His fingertips had become his most precise diagnostic equipment, and now those fingertips were 60 feet from a 1962 Ferrari 250 GT, with a problem that 12 of the best mechanics in the country had failed to solve. Andre didn't know it yet, but his grandfather's voice, that same calm, steady voice from a garage in Flint with no door, was about to speak louder than every degree, every title, and every piece of expensive equipment in the entire Caldwell Industries building. Listen first. Touch second. Think the whole time. Preston Caldwell had built his fortune on one principle: never ignore what doesn't make sense. A homeless man walks into a room full of trained mechanics and claims he can hear a fault that 12 specialists missed. That doesn't make sense, which meant it was either delusion or something worth paying attention to. Caldwell came down from the observation office himself. No announcement, no entourage. Just a tall man in a gray cashmere sweater and reading glasses, walking across the R&D floor like he had all the time in the world. Thornton spotted him first. His posture changed instantly. Spine straight, chin up. The confidence from 30 seconds ago replaced by something tight and careful. "Mr. Caldwell, I was just about to have security remove this individual. He wandered in off the street and—" "I saw," Caldwell said. His voice was quiet. Not soft, quiet. The kind of quiet that made people stop talking. "I watched the whole thing from upstairs." He looked at Andre, studied him the way an investor studies a pitch. Not the slides, but the person behind them. The torn coat, the cracked boots, the hands. "You said the misfire is mechanical, not electrical." Andre nodded. "Yes, sir." 12 mechanics, 3 of them from Ferrari's own restoration division in Italy, ran every diagnostic in the book. They all said the engine is mechanically sound, electrical fault of unknown origin. "They're wrong," Andre said. No arrogance, no attitude, just fact. A murmur rippled through the bay. Thornton stepped forward. "Mr. Caldwell, this is ridiculous. This man is a former employee who is terminated for cause. He's not qualified to—" "Gregory." Caldwell didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. "I've spent $400,000 on qualified people. The car still doesn't run. So I'd like to hear what the unqualified man has to say." Thornton's mouth opened, then closed. He stepped back, but his eyes stayed on Andre. Narrow, hot, calculating. Caldwell turned back to Andre. "Tell me what you hear." Andre took a breath. "May I get closer to the engine?" Caldwell gestured toward the Ferrari. "Be my guest." Andre walked to the lift. Every eye in the building followed him. Mechanics with 20 years of experience. Engineers with advanced degrees. Technicians who'd worked on cars worth more than most houses. All of them watching a homeless man approach a $3 million vehicle like he'd been invited to Sunday dinner. He didn't touch anything. Not yet. He stood at the open hood and tilted his head. The engine was idling. A low, beautiful rumble that most people would call perfect. Andre closed his eyes. The bay noise faded. The whispers faded. The fluorescent hum faded. All that remained was the engine. 12 cylinders, 24 valves. A rhythm as complex as a jazz ensemble. And buried inside that rhythm, a ghost note. A faint, irregular knock that appeared every 9 to 11 cycles. Not consistent enough to trigger a diagnostic code. Not loud enough for most ears to catch. But it was there. Steady as a heartbeat, with an extra beat. Andre opened his eyes. "Started cold for me. Kill it. Then start it again." One of the technicians looked at Caldwell. Caldwell nodded. The engine shut down. Silence. Then the starter cranked and the V12 roared back to life. In that 2-second window between ignition and stable idle, the knock was louder, just slightly, just enough. Andre nodded to himself. "I know what this is," he said, "and I can prove it. But I need to put my hands on the engine, no tools, just my hands." The room erupted in murmurs. Thornton let out a sharp laugh. "Mr. Caldwell, you can't be serious. You're going to let a street person touch a 1962 Ferrari with his bare hands? If he damages anything, then it'll be on me. Caldwell said simply. He looked at Andre one more time. Something passed between them. Not trust, not yet, but recognition. The kind of look one craftsman gives another when he sees something familiar in the way a man holds himself near a machine. "You've got one shot," Caldwell said. "Show me." But before Andre could step forward, a voice came from the far side of the bay. "Hold on. I want to see this." Every head turned. Walking through the side entrance was a woman in her late 60s, silver hair pulled back tight. A dark blue mechanic's jacket with oil stains so old they'd become part of the fabric. She carried herself with the quiet authority of someone who didn't need to introduce herself, because everyone in that room already knew who she was. Eleanor Hayes. If you worked in automotive restoration, Eleanor Hayes was the name you mentioned with reverence. She had restored more classic Ferraris than anyone alive. She'd been personally consulted by the Ferrari Museum in Modena. She'd written the technical reference guide that most high-end restoration shops kept on their shelves like a Bible. At 68 years old, she was the undisputed authority on vintage Italian engines in the Western Hemisphere. Caldwell had called her 2 days ago as a last resort. She'd flown in from her shop in Monterey, California, and was supposed to begin her own examination the following morning. But she'd arrived early. And she'd heard enough. Eleanor walked past Thornton without acknowledging him, past the engineers, past the technicians. She stopped about 10 feet from Andre and looked at him. Not at his clothes, not at his boots, at his hands. "You said you can hear the fault," she said. "Yes, ma'am. And you want to diagnose it by touch. No scan, no scope, no tools." "That's right." Eleanor was quiet for a moment. Then the corner of her mouth lifted, just barely. "All right," she said. She pulled a stool from the nearest workstation, sat down, and crossed her arms. "I've been working on these engines for 40 years. I couldn't find it in 2 days of phone consultations with the team. So let's see what your hands know that my instruments don't." She looked at Caldwell. "Let him work." Caldwell nodded. Andre stepped up to the engine. The bay went dead silent. 30 people, not a sound. Just the low idle of a 60-year-old V12 and the faint hum of fluorescent lights overhead. Andre Vaughn, homeless, nameless, dismissed, placed his bare hands on the engine block of a $3 million Ferrari. And what happened over the next 20 minutes would make Eleanor Hayes do something she hadn't done in over a decade. She stood up from her stool. Andre didn't rush. He placed both palms flat on the valve cover of the Ferrari's V12 and held them there. Eyes closed, fingers spread wide. The engine vibrated through his skin like a conversation only he could understand. 30 seconds passed. A full minute. Nobody moved. Thornton shifted his weight. He wanted to say something. You could see it building behind his teeth. But with Caldwell and Eleanor Hayes both watching, he kept his mouth shut. Barely. Andre moved his right hand slowly down the side of the block. Past the first cylinder bank. Past the second. His fingers stopped at the third. He pressed his palm flat against the metal and held it there for another 15 seconds. Then he opened his eyes. "Here," he said. "The problem starts here." One of the senior mechanics, a man named Howard Coleman, who'd been with Caldwell Industries for 16 years, shook his head. "We checked that cylinder 3 times. Compression is perfect. Spark timing is dead on. There's nothing wrong with cylinder 3. Andre didn't argue. "Turn the engine off," he said. The technician looked at Caldwell. Caldwell nodded. The engine died. Andre leaned over the open hood and reached both hands deep into the engine bay. His fingers found the intake manifold runner for the 3rd cylinder. He wrapped his hands around it and closed his eyes again. "Start it." The V12 fired back to life. Andre held the manifold runner while the engine ran. His fingers moved in tiny increments, feeling, searching, reading vibrations the way a doctor reads a pulse. Then his left hand stopped. His index finger and middle finger pressed against a specific point on the runner. A spot with a cast aluminum met the gasket seal at the cylinder head. "Right here," Andre said. "You feel that?" Howard Coleman stepped forward. "Feel what? There's nothing—" "Put your fingers exactly where mine are." Coleman hesitated, then placed 2 fingers beside Andre's on the manifold runner. He frowned. Then his eyebrows lifted. "That's a pulse. A tiny vibration that shouldn't be there." Andre nodded. "Hairline vacuum leak. The gasket isn't blown, it's delaminated. One layer has separated from the other by maybe 15/1000ths of an inch. Not enough to show on a compression test, not enough to trigger a diagnostic code, but enough to let a micro pocket of air into the intake charge every few cycles." He pulled his hands out and wiped them on his coat. "That air pocket leans out the fuel mixture in cylinder 3 just enough to cause an intermittent misfire. It doesn't happen every cycle, only when the engine hits a certain temperature range and the aluminum expands just right. That's why it comes and goes. That's why your diagnostic equipment couldn't catch it." The room was silent. Howard Coleman stared at the engine like he was seeing it for the first time. Eleanor Hayes uncrossed her arms. That was revelation number 1. But Andre wasn't finished. "There's a second problem," he said. "And this one is why your Italian team couldn't find the first one." He walked around to the other side of the engine bay and pointed to the distributor assembly. "Someone replaced the original Morelli distributor with an aftermarket unit. It's a good reproduction, close to factory spec, but the advance curve is slightly different. 2 degrees at idle, maybe 3 at 2500 RPM. He looked at Eleanor. "On a standard rebuild, that difference wouldn't matter. The engine would compensate. But on this specific engine, a late production Series 2 with the revised cam profile, those 2 degrees change the harmonic signature of the entire firing sequence." Eleanor's eyes narrowed. Not with suspicion, with recognition. Andre continued. "The aftermarket distributor is masking the vacuum leak. It shifts the misfire pattern just enough to make it look electrical instead of mechanical. Every mechanic who worked on this car heard something wrong, checked the ignition system, found the non-original distributor, and assumed that was the problem. They'd replace components in the ignition chain, the misfire would seem to improve for a few hours as the engine cooled and reseated, and then it would come back." He looked at the row of mechanics standing along the wall. "Am I wrong? Did every single one of you start with the ignition system?" Silence. Then one of them, a specialist who'd flown in from a restoration shop in Connecticut, nodded slowly. "That's exactly what we did." "It's a false trail," Andre said. "The distributor isn't the disease. It's the camouflage." Eleanor Hayes stood up from her stool. First time in 20 minutes. "He's right," she said quietly. "The revised cam profile in the late Series 2 changes the overlap timing by just enough to amplify any intake inconsistency. I wrote about that exact issue in my technical reference, Chapter 14, page 311. And I completely missed it in my phone consultations, because everyone kept telling me the problem was electrical." She looked at Andre with an expression that landed somewhere between disbelief and deep respect. That was revelation number 2. Thornton had been standing near the back wall with his arms folded. His face had gone from smug to stiff to something close to pale. But he wasn't done. "Lucky guesses," he said. His voice was louder than it needed to be. "Anyone who's read a manual could—" "There's a third thing," Andre said. He didn't look at Thornton. He looked at Caldwell. "And this one has nothing to do with the engine." He crouched down and slid his hand along the underside of the chassis, just behind the front crossmember. His fingers traced the frame rail until they stopped at a specific spot. "Right here. Feel the surface." Caldwell crouched beside him. He ran his fingers along the frame. His brow furrowed. "It's rough," Caldwell said. Like sandpaper, almost. Andre nodded. "That's because someone ground down a section of the frame and recoated it, probably 15-20 years ago. There's a weld underneath that filler, and it's not factory." The room buzzed. A non-factory weld on the frame of a $3 million collectible Ferrari was a serious issue. It could affect structural integrity. It could affect insurance valuation. It could mean the car had been in an accident that was never disclosed. "Your 12 mechanics were all focused on the engine," Andre said. "Nobody checked the chassis because nobody was asked to. But when I was under there listening to the exhaust resonance, I felt the inconsistency in the frame. The metal is thicker on one side than the other by about 40 thousandths. That means this car took a front-end impact at some point in its history, and somebody repaired it off the books." He stood up and brushed off his knees. "The engine problems I can fix today. The frame issue, you'll want a metallurgist and a full X-ray before you drive this car at speed. Because right now, that weld is holding, but I wouldn't trust it past 110 miles per hour." Dead silence. Caldwell stood up slowly. He looked at Andre the way you look at someone who just told you your house is on fire and also showed you where the exits are. Eleanor Hayes walked over. She stopped directly in front of Andre. This was the woman who had restored Ferraris for kings, sheikhs, and tech billionaires. The woman whose name was carved into the history of Italian automotive craftsmanship. She extended her hand. "What's your name?" she asked. "Andre Vaughn, ma'am." "Andre." She shook his hand firmly. "In 40 years, I have never seen anyone diagnose a delaminated intake gasket by touch alone. I've never seen anyone identify a masked misfire through distributor advance interference without a single instrument. And I've certainly never seen anyone catch a hidden frame repair while lying under a car listening to exhaust tone." She paused. Then she said something that made every person in that bay, including Gregory Thornton, go completely still. "You don't just have skill. You have a gift. And whoever let you end up on the street should be ashamed of themselves." She didn't look at Thornton when she said it. She didn't have to. Caldwell didn't say a word for a long time. He stood beside the Ferrari with his hands in his pockets, looking at Andre the way a man looks at an answer he's been chasing for months. Then he turned to Howard Coleman. "Get him what he needs." Thornton stepped forward. "Mr. Caldwell, you cannot be serious. This man is not an employee. He has no credentials. He has no insurance clearance. If anything happens to that vehicle—" "Howard," Caldwell said, ignoring Thornton completely. "Get him what he needs." Andre shook his head. "I don't need anything." He rolled up his sleeves. The room watched him the way a crowd watches a surgeon walk into an operating theater. He stepped onto the platform beside the lift and leaned into the engine bay. His hands moved with a patience that made the air feel heavier. He started at the intake manifold, the same third-cylinder runner where he'd found the delaminated gasket. His fingers worked the mounting bolts by hand, loosening each one in a specific sequence. Not the sequence in the repair manual, a different one. One that accounted for the thermal expansion pattern of 60-year-old cast aluminum. Eleanor noticed. She tilted her head but said nothing. Andre lifted the runner free, gently, the way you'd lift a sleeping child from a car seat. He set it on a clean shop cloth on the adjacent workbench and turned it over. "There," he said. Everyone leaned in. On the gasket surface, invisible to the naked eye from any normal angle, was a faint line, a separation in the composite material so thin it looked like a shadow. Andre ran his fingertip along it. The outer layer bonded to the aluminum, the inner layer bonded to the head, but the middle delaminated. Probably from a combination of age, heat cycling, and the wrong torque sequence during the last rebuild. He looked at the row of mechanics. Whoever reassembled this engine torqued the manifold bolts in factory order. But on a car this old, with gasket material this degraded, factory order creates uneven clamping pressure. You have to start from the center and work outward in a star pattern, or the gasket compresses unevenly. Howard Coleman closed his eyes and exhaled through his nose. He was the one who'd performed the last reassembly. He knew Andre was right. Andre set the runner aside and moved to the distributor. His fingers found the hold-down clamp, released it, and rotated the distributor body 2 degrees counterclockwise, back to the position that matched the original Morelli advance curve for the late Series 2 cam profile. No timing light, no stroboscope, just his hands and whatever map of this engine lived inside his head. "Start it," he said. The technician hit the ignition. The V12 turned over once, twice. Then it caught. The sound that filled the bay was different. Everyone heard it. You didn't need Andre's ears to know. The idle was smoother, deeper. The ragged edge was gone. The ghost note had vanished. What remained was a clean, even 12-cylinder rumble, the sound that engine was born to make in a factory in Maranello in 1962. Andre closed his eyes and listened. 5 seconds. 10. 15. He opened them. It's clean. Nobody moved. The engine idled. Perfect. Then Eleanor Hayes did something that no one in that room expected. She started clapping. Not slow, polite applause. A single, firm clap that cracked through the silence like a starter pistol. Then another. Then a steady rhythm that said more than any standing ovation in a concert hall. One by one, the mechanics joined in. Howard Coleman, the technician at the ignition console, 2 engineers by the diagnostic station, the specialist from Connecticut, a woman from the paint bay who'd wandered in to see what the commotion was about. The applause spread across the R&D bay like a wave. 30 people, clapping for a man in torn boots who had just done with his bare hands what $250,000 in expertise could not. Andre stood beside the engine. He didn't bow. He didn't smile. He just placed one hand flat on the warm valve cover, the way you'd place a hand on the shoulder of an old friend, and nodded once. Across the bay, Gregory Thornton stood with his arms at his sides. He was not clapping. His face was gray. His jaw was locked tight. And for the first time in 9 years at Caldwell Industries, the director of technical operations looked exactly like what he was. A man who had run out of lies. Preston Caldwell watched the whole scene from beside the lift, and behind his reading glasses, behind the quiet expression he wore like armor, something had already shifted. A decision was forming. Not just about the Ferrari, not just about Andre, about Gregory Thornton, and what Thornton had done 3 years ago. The applause faded. The engine was shut down. The bay returned to its normal hum of fluorescent lights and quiet conversation. But nothing about this day was normal anymore. Preston Caldwell walked over to Andre. Not fast, not slow. The walk of a man who had already made up his mind and was simply choosing the right words. "How long were you with my company?" he asked. Andre hesitated. 5 years, sir. Senior mechanical engineer, Department 4. And you were terminated? Yes, sir. For the Kessler prototype failure. Andre's voice was steady. That failure wasn't mine. The timeline was rushed. The calibration settings I recommended were overridden. The authorization logs were altered after the fact. Caldwell nodded. Not the nod of a man hearing something new. The nod of a man hearing something confirmed. "I've already asked my legal team to pull your original personnel file," Caldwell said. "The complete file. Not the summary, not the version that went to HR. The raw digital records. Authorization timestamps, access logs, every revision." Thornton's head snapped toward Caldwell. The color drained from his face like water from a cracked glass. Caldwell didn't look at him. He kept his eyes on Andre. "What you did today wasn't just impressive. It was extraordinary. Eleanor Hayes, a woman I flew across the country and who has turned down job offers from every major auction house in Europe, just told me you have the best diagnostic hands she's ever seen." He paused. Let the weight of it settle. "I'd like to offer you a position. Not your old job, something new. Head of Special Restorations, a division I've been planning for 2 years, but never had the right person to lead. You'd report directly to me, not to anyone else in this building." Andre stared at him. 3 years under a bridge, 3 years of cold concrete and soup kitchens and silence. 3 years of being invisible. And now this. "You don't have to answer today," Caldwell said. "But the offer stands. And Andre, it comes with a full internal investigation into the circumstances of your termination." He extended his hand. Andre took it. The investigation didn't take long. Caldwell's legal team pulled the digital records from the Kessler prototype incident within 48 hours. Authorization logs, server timestamps, email chains. Every piece of data that Thornton thought he'd buried 3 years ago. He hadn't buried it deep enough. The timestamps told the whole story. Andre's original calibration settings had been uploaded at 9:14 in the morning, 2 hours before the client demonstration. At 11:41, 17 minutes before the engine test, someone logged in under a supervisor override and changed 3 critical parameters. The override code belonged to Gregory Thornton. But that wasn't all. The post-incident report, the one that blamed Andre for the failure, had been edited 6 times in a single evening. Each revision removed another reference to Thornton's involvement. The final version, the one submitted to HR and used to justify Andre's termination, bore no trace of Thornton's override. His name appeared nowhere. Andre's name appeared everywhere. It was clean, professional, and completely fraudulent. Caldwell called an emergency meeting of the executive board. Thornton was summoned to the 8th floor conference room on a Monday morning. He walked in expecting to defend his department's budget for the next quarter. Instead, he found Preston Caldwell at the head of the table. The company's chief legal counsel on his left, the head of human resources on his right, a printed stack of documents 6 inches thick in the center of the table. Thornton sat down. He looked at the documents. He looked at Caldwell. "Gregory," Caldwell said, "I'm going to give you one opportunity to explain these records. I suggest you use it carefully." Thornton tried. He talked for 12 minutes. He blamed system errors. He blamed IT migration issues. He suggested the timestamps were corrupted. He implied that Andre might have accessed the system remotely after termination to alter the logs. None of it held. The metadata was clean. The audit trail was unbroken. Every revision, every login, every override traced back to one person. Gregory Thornton. He was terminated that afternoon. Escorted from the building the same way Andre had been 3 years earlier. Security on each side, a box of personal items in his arms. The only difference was that this time, the entire R&D floor watched through the glass walls. The same people who had been too afraid to speak up when Thornton humiliated Andre in the bay. The same people who had laughed nervously or looked away. This time, nobody looked away. But Caldwell wasn't finished. A formal complaint was filed with the Michigan Department of Labor, citing wrongful termination through falsified documentation. Caldwell's legal team also referred the matter to the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission for investigation into a pattern of discriminatory management practices. Because Andre wasn't the only one. A quiet internal review revealed that in 9 years under Thornton's leadership, 14 employees of color had been terminated, reassigned, or pushed to resign from Department 4. 14. The turnover rate for non-white engineers in his division was 4 times the company average. It had been in the data the whole time. Nobody had looked. Now everybody was looking. Thornton's engineering license was placed under review, pending the outcome of the EEOC investigation. His name was removed from 3 published patents that had been built on work originally led by Andre Vaughn, and every professional reference he had cultivated over 20 years of career networking evaporated overnight. No one blacklisted him. No one needed to. The truth did the work all by itself. The same system that had crushed Andre Vaughan in silence now turned its full weight on the man who had operated it. And this time, the system got it right. 6 months later, Andre Vaughan stood in a brand new workshop on the ground floor of Caldwell Industries. His name was on the door: Head of Special Restorations. His first project, a 1961 Ferrari 250 GT Berlinetta, sat on the lift behind him, waiting. Eleanor Hayes flew in from Monterey once a month to consult. She didn't need to. She wanted to. Because in Andre's hands, she saw something she thought the industry had lost. The old way. Listen first. Touch second. Think the whole time. Andre still kept his grandfather's engine manual in his desk drawer. Same worn pages, same soft cover. Some things you don't upgrade. You just carry them forward. Now here's my question. If you were standing in that R&D bay, watching a homeless man get humiliated for trying to help, would you have spoken up? Or would you have looked away like everyone else? Be honest. Drop your answer in the comments. And if you caught the detail about the third cylinder early in the story, go back and watch from the beginning. There's a clue in the very first line of dialogue that most people miss the first time. If this story moved you, hit subscribe, because every week we find people like Andre, people the world threw away, who turned out to be exactly what the world needed. Hashtag Justice for Andre. Hashtag Talent has no address. Hashtag Never Judge.
12 mechanics couldn't fix it. $400,000 in expert fees couldn't fix it. But Andre wants no tunes, no badge, no invitation, fixes with his bare hands. 3 years under a bridge. Not because he lacked talent, because one man with power decided a black engineer didn't deserve a seat at the table. And you know what's incredible? Andre never stopped. Broken alarm clocks, throwaway models, anything with moving parts, because his grandfather planted something inside him that no termination letter could touch. Listen first, touch second, think the whole time. Thornton took everything from Andre, his job, his home, his name, but he couldn't take what lived in those hands. And that's the truth about real skill. It doesn't need a title, it doesn't need permission, it doesn't need one moment to speak. But here's what keeps me up at night. 30 people got Andre that's humiliated, and nobody said a word. So ask yourself this: how many times have you watched someone get torn down and chosen silence because it was easier? And how many Andre are out there right now, waiting for one person to just not look away? Drop your honest answer in the comments. If this story moved you, subscribe. Every week we find people the world threw away, who turned out to be exactly what the world needed. Talents had no arrest. Remember that.